Welcome to the All In podcast with Nate Pale. I am your host, Nate Pale. Today's guest, awesome guy, Tats Nakagawa with Castagra Roofing. Tats is a podcast host, and we talk a lot of stuff about podcasting, about getting out of your comfort levels, about pushing your boundaries, about being an introvert, and just learning skills to help you challenge yourself and push your personal development and how that can really make an impact over an extended period of time. Tats drops a bunch of knowledge. I really think you're going to enjoy this one. I say that about all of them, but this one was really exciting for me, and I hope you get a lot out of it too.
Want to go far in business and in life? You can't do it alone. The secret is expanding your network of personal relationships, building friendships, connecting on an intimate level, away from the office, over a coffee or cocktail. Welcome to All In with Nate Peo, the show that asks what happens when you go all in and leverage the power of your network of personal relationships.
Hey, welcome to the All In podcast with Nate Peo. I'm your host, Nate Peo. I'm sitting today with Tats Nakagawa from Castagra Roofing. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Castagra. Yeah, absolutely. You did well.
Okay. So Tats and I connected over LinkedIn, and if you follow me on LinkedIn or you follow Tats, you kind of know there's a lot of power behind LinkedIn especially like I think recently, like within the last 3 or 4 months, LinkedIn's really changed from being this place where you posted your resume and maybe you shared a Forbes article, or maybe you connected with a recruiter or you stayed in contact with where people were, but you never really did any engagement. And over the last few months, I think LinkedIn's gotten a lot more active. There's a lot more stuff going on. It's a lot easier to connect with people and have some personal engagement. And Tats was on there. I was on there. I don't know how we kind of like crossed paths initially, but Tats reached out to me and said, hey, I got this podcast. I'm in the construction building materials industry. You're in construction. You want to be on my show? And I was like, hey, I love that. I'm in the process of creating my own podcast, and I've never done a podcast before. I've never been on a podcast before. So I'd love to see how that would go. And then we had a phone conversation to kind of like get to know you. And then like I learned like a whole bunch of stuff about you. Like you're more than just boring industry building skills, but there's a lot of cool science behind what you're doing. But there's also a side of you that is really about connecting and making personal relationships. So how did you kind of get plugged into LinkedIn, and how do you use it for your advantage?
Oh man, I have a big story on this. I'll try to condense it. I feel like a grandfather in the social media space because I got into LinkedIn on 2004. Wow. So at the time there was maybe 1 million users on. It just came out of Silicon Valley, and I was an early adopter. And I knew right away that this was going to be huge. And I jumped on it and I started to play around with it.
Where did you hear about it from?
I don't remember. It's just one of those things. It showed up in my inbox. I saw it a few places and I started playing around with it. But I'm a shy person. And I thought, maybe I could use this online tool to connect with people, right? Because I'm an introvert by nature. And I started to kind of get the concept of it because there was at the time, about 12 different platforms I experimented with. And I narrowed it down to 3, which I thought would survive. And out of the 3, only LinkedIn is thriving. All the other ones, you don't hear those names again. I think Academy or Rise, I think at the time.
I don't recall any of those.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of little ones that like Spoke was another one. Basically died away. And then, but I knew there was 3, I figured that one of those would survive. And I kind of doubled down on those. So I became an early expert, right? You can become an expert by studying something mainstream like marketing for 20 years, or you could jump on something quick and just spend a lot of time on it and become an expert by default. So I became this default expert because there was no one really on it. So so at the time I was one of the few people that was really active. LinkedIn brought me in on a conference calls because they wanted feedback on how this platform should go. So here we were. I was like the only person from Canada. There's a few people from the States, a few people worldwide. And the founders were asking us, like what we should do to grow the platform. We're trying to give the feedback on the platform. So during that time, I also started to do speeches. I didn't really like speaking. My speaking was terrible, but I gave about 30 talks on LinkedIn in like 2005, 2006. And each time I did a presentation, I said, give me your business cards, I'll connect with you. So I connected with thousands of people through that process.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How have you seen it evolve, and how has that impacted your ability to connect with people currently?
Wow. I mean, I was really hot on it for a while, and I built my network very, very quickly. And then at some point I got burnt out because it got to a point where it was kind of saturated in my head. And like you said, over the last couple of years, it's really come back. And my interest in social media, especially LinkedIn, has grown. So I'm embracing it again. But for a while there, I was like, this isn't going the way I'm a little sort of disjointed with this. So I backed away.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of engagement, but I also I'm starting to see people come in with like a like for like mentality of making connections, just collecting business cards, for lack of a better term. So hopefully it doesn't get too convoluted with, people doing land grabs and just trying to turn it into like a crappy space. Like I enjoy it because it's not like Facebook where it's polarizing, or in Twitter, where it's just crazy stuff going on. But it's like, hey, you can be professional. You can talk about professional stuff, connect with other professionals, but you can also still engage a little bit, showing a personality of side of yourself that makes it easier for people to relate to you, and I think get to know you a bit better, so that when they do meet you or do have a connection with you, you're not like just two complete strangers. You're like, oh, I kind of know you're into some of these hobbies that I am, or you have a passion for other things. Yeah. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. I really enjoy connecting with people. I mean, I'm not as good in person, face to face. I've gotten good at it, technically, because I learned it, but I get really tired if I shake a lot of hands. I can do it, right? But definitely using social to sort of, connect with the key people, and then just building deeper relationships is definitely fun. I mean, that's what sort of drew me to what you were doing. You were interested in the podcasting thing, and I invited you because I thought, you know what, this guy's kind of really interested in this stuff. So I always like with my podcast, and what I'm doing is to invite first time guests sometimes, because they're, it's an experience. I learn a lot, and helping people sort of come out of their shell is rewarding for me, because I've suffered with that for so long, and I've had to really work on that. So what you're doing appeals to me because I've had to do it and continually push myself to do that.
Yeah, I bet we probably talked just as long after the podcast as we did on the podcast regarding like how to do podcasting, how to get started, like ideas behind it. Yeah. And you're right. Like I had this shell too that probably prevented me from posting a lot more, building a following, or just networking more in general for a lot of years. But as I became more comfortable with it and started doing more, I saw my career opportunities expand. I started doing my job better. I started meeting more people that were able to help me do my job better. And so I thought, hey, what would really happen if I just kind of like put all my efforts into expanding a network and doing things out of my comfort zone and see where that took me. And I know like whenever you push your limits, good things tend to happen. So I'm glad you encouraged me to do that, but I totally get where you're coming from with like, being uncomfortable at first, and you slowly get better at it.
Well, I love your all-in mentality, because I think in order to succeed, you have to be able to put yourself out there. And I always say that entrepreneurship, and I think I heard this somewhere, I can't remember where, is a social exercise, right? In order to grow a company, you have to become more comfortable in putting yourself out there and exposing yourself to be a failure in front of more and more people. Right? And then learning from it and progressing. So I always have a great deal of respect for people like, let's say, Elon Musk, that, regularly fail in front of millions and millions of people and not get discouraged and get unfocused. I'm impressed, because it's one thing to say I can take failure, but it's another thing to have a million people coming at you with something. It's the difference between putting a 2x4 on the ground, walking across it, and then putting it 10,000 feet in the air and doing the same thing and see if you can execute the same way.
Exactly. It's funny you say that, because so a lot of times I'll walk on a curb and I'll be like, this is easy. But if I got on like a railing, 3 stories up, I'd be like, there's no way, I'll fall off for sure. But
but it's the same exercise, right? I came from the sporting background. It's like, can you make the second serve under pressure, right? With one person while watching, or, Roger Federer or something, 10 million people watching. Can you still make that? It's the same movement. Why do we get in our head about it, right? How do we dissociate ourselves from that?
Exactly. So you talked about having a podcast, and when you first reached out to me, and I didn't know exactly what your podcast was about, I was like, well, who are you? And I go to your profile, because you always check out it. If somebody connects with you, you always go look at their profile, where do they work, what do they do? I'm like, roofing, building materials. How interesting of a podcast could this be? Because I'm in the building industry, you're in the building industry, and we know at the end of the day, it's not glamorous. It's not super exciting. So, some people will be like, this is the coolest product ever. These are the best doors. And you're like, it's a door. It's just a door. But why would you think that, and not to go back to where your podcast isn't just about building materials, but I think it's about people in the industry and their stories, and there's some excitement to it. Then I started thinking, why are you doing, how does this podcasting help you do your business or sales? Why would you be in this kind of space? It was just, the whole idea of it was I was very curious about it. Why would you do that? I know a lot of people in social media that want to be influencers, hey, I'm gonna have a podcast, I'm gonna do a big reach. But what drew you to doing a podcast for a building materials company?
Well, one of the things that, my developer really understood is I enjoy helping people. I've always, in the various things, if I look back at when I was the happiest, when I was the most excited about what I was doing, it was about helping people. And then also growing myself. I've always been a junkie, before, I would write for, when it was, I'm an early adopter, right? So life hacking was very popular. And we used to write for a site that had 80,000 subscribers, which back then was huge, right? And we're talking about personal development on this site and doing things. So I've always been interested in personal development. And I thought the podcasting, I always wanted to do it because I felt that, I could explore different topics, learn, personally grow, inspire others, teach other people, get access to potential opinion leaders that could lead to partnerships or just friendships. And I thought that could, when I started to categorize all the things that the podcast could do, it was for me, it was like a 6-in-1. It was the ultimate leverage, right? There's one, in business, there's 2 things you try to do, right? Once you get your core values and stuff done, you try to systemize things and you try to leverage things. And I thought the podcast would ultimately leverage something, and something I could do for years in the future, and I would still enjoy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's what drew it to me, is when I started thinking about what I loved best about my job is I loved meeting with people and networking. And at first, when I first got into networking, I thought it's about collecting cards and it's about people wanting to do business with me. And I had to be telling them no, because I'm a professional buyer and all these sellers were coming to me, hey, we want you to do this, you want you to do this. And when I started really grasping what I loved about networking, was when I found somebody that I just was like, hey, this person's really cool. This person's really interesting. They have this great product they're selling or whatever it is. I want to get them connected to some more people. I want to see them succeed. And I started doing introductions. Hey, can you be with this person? And just helping them grow themselves. And I was like, hey, that's really uplifting. And the podcast is I guess for me, a better way to cast a bigger net, interact with more people. Maybe you might not have one-on-one interaction with some of the people that you're inspiring, but you're going to inspire some people to maybe do a little bit more. And then the guests you meet, had it not been for the podcast, there probably wouldn't have been a reason as much of a reason for us to chat and develop to become friends, and other people that I've met through this crazy world called networking on the internet, and trying to take it into more of a one-on-one personal connection, either through a podcast like this or in real life when it's convenient. So yeah, I get where that is and the excitement behind it.
You know, the interesting thing, when I first started, my thoughts on networking, when I first started this social media networking stuff back in the day, where I did those speaking on online networking, and to my thoughts now. Well, when I first started networking, there was still the concept of 6 degrees of separation, right? You're never more than 6 degrees away from anyone. That was a study done in the 70s. Now, with social media, I mean, Facebook says that we're 2.5 degrees, right, away from anyone, right? So that was interesting to me. But my concept of networking was connecting people back in the day, right? And that involves, and I used to systemize it. I'm like, okay, what's the perfect referral? How can I make so I create these lists of things where I would have a list of all the ways that I could help someone. And then I had a second column where all the things I was looking for. And when I would meet people, I would always be trying to help them first, but I would send them a list of all the ways I could help them and all the things I was looking for. And I would try to make the introduction as smooth as possible. Like I would ask the first person and pre-qualify, I have this person, would that be a good introduction? Then I would go to the next person. I'd make that facilitation really smooth. But then nowadays, I realize the limitations of that, because you can only, in theory, make about 150 to 300 close connections that way. And my thinking around networking now is shifted from networking to developing communities. And the difference between networking and communities, and you just hit it on the head, you just kind of said it in a different way, is that you're no longer the intermediary. You're creating the environment for good things to happen. And sometimes you connect people, but you're creating the environment for good things to happen. And that's where you can stay in touch with thousands of people at the same time.
Yeah, I remember we talked a bit about this one of the first few times we chatted, and I've watched that, because when I started trying to figure out how to podcast, like I started stalking some people that were doing it, not like anybody that's doing it at like huge levels of success, but like people that have been like in the space like you had for an amount of time, had developed a following and had a platform. And I found this other podcaster, her name's Heather. She runs a podcast called Unconventional Leaders.
Yeah.
And I followed her to her website. I found her on TikTok, and I followed her over to her website. And then like, how'd she set it up? How does the podcast look? Like, what platforms are they using? Okay, how could I, like, where's it, like, what should I put on my website? Oh, there's this Facebook group. Let me go into this Facebook group and see what this is about. And then you go in it, and she's, facilitates it, and she has the concept behind it. But for the most part, the people within the group, they post and they interact with each other. So like you said, it's a community. You have an idea of, shared values, and then you go in there and you're connecting with other people, they're like-minded. And so you're making these connections within each other, trying to help each other out. And then they're out, doing their thing too. So the community aspect, I think, is a great concept. And
which is, what's interesting? This is an unintended consequences. Back in the day, there was a book club, right? People in the companies would get a book, and then at lunch hour, they would sit with their employees and talk about a book. Now, within our company, it's a small company, but we just talk about episodes. Like, if there's a good episode, we're like, oh, the guest said this and this and this. And then we'd be like, oh, maybe we could do that in our company, right? So it sparked a conversation about improvement and growth that I never thought expected. So,
yeah, I like the idea of being around and exposed to more ideas. Like when you're limited to, there's like a saying, like the 5 people you spend the most time with is who you reflect their values and their person. So it's like, choose your people wisely. But I think it's about the ideas you surround yourself with. And so sometimes we're in a closed group of people, just not for any wrong reason, just because that's who we associate with. We don't have expanded our network that much. So we're limited to the same ideas. But when you go meet somebody that's from another state or from another country or from a different background as you, all of a sudden they have a different take on it. And you're like, oh, this is another perspective. and maybe my views are narrow, and now I expand to this other perspective, and it grows from there. And when you add more ideas into it, I think your creativity grows, and it helps you reach your full potential as a person or as a company when you can explore more ideas and more concepts.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's one thing to read a book, but then if you have the author or the entrepreneur just telling you, I find that you soak it in. You're like inspired by it, right? So I feel like it's 10 times more impactful than just reading that same content. When that person, you're responding back and forth with that content, it's memorable. And another two things I found is that I go with curiosity-driven format. Even if I think I know the answer, sometimes or a lot of times I'll ask. And what I find is about even in an area where I feel like I have some expertise, half the time I'm like completely surprised, right, with the answer, or I learned something new. So it sort of points out to the fact that, how many times in a day are we kind of limited by how our brain is working? We're making a whole bunch of assumptions because that's how we survive in the world, and we simplify things. But what about that curiosity for us to just grow, right? So it just sort of pointed out a whole bunch of things. And another thing that I always realize, like today, I interviewed someone that seemingly seemed like it had a completely different background than me. But then I found out he likes sailing. I found out he came out of the sports business like I did. He goes with the same management philosophy that we use at our company, and a whole bunch of similarities, but he's got a completely different sort of outward background. So it just opened my mind off that there's commonalities that can be discovered.
I love that. And that is something that I try to tell people, why you should be more personable on LinkedIn or other social medias that you're comfortable with, but specifically for LinkedIn. So like you said, you just know this person from an interaction, and you're making a snap decision that like says, hey, we don't have anything in common. You're on one side of the table, I'm on the other side of the table. But if you showcase it like, hey, I'm kind of into tennis, I like sailing, then all of a sudden you're like, and I'm saying, like, when you're on LinkedIn, it's like, you're not posting pictures of your sailboat and washing your sailboat and doing all kinds of stuff. But when you say I learned this from sailing, and it applies to business. Somebody goes, they like sailing, I like sailing. We have something in common that's more than just this business transaction that may or may not happen. And then when you start going, oh, that's something to approach you on. I have something that I could connect with you on. We could talk about it. We can develop a friendship. And then the friendship blossoms a little bit more. And you find out, like you said, oh, you came in the same background as I had. You know some of the same people we know. All of a sudden you go from complete strangers at odds with each other to, hey, you're like somebody I wish I had met a long time ago. I mean, and all of a sudden people just relate better to you, and you're able to, just have better relationships, I think.
Yeah, and to your point, it's the platform that sort of messes people up, because they see, oh my goodness, I could connect to 1,000 people, and then my message will get spread all over the place, and then they turn into spammers, right? And I'm pretty good with it, but every once in a while I get that, oh, maybe I can optimize this kind of feeling. But realistically, if you develop deep relationships for key people, that's the key. And marketing too, right? Like marketing is like, when people think about marketing or growing a business, and I took a long time for me to figure this out, is if you focus, like if you're trying to find product market fit, you're like trying to make one person happy, like unbelievably happy. And you learn how to make one person unbelievably happy. And then you try to figure out how to make 10 people unbelievably happy. And then you start to find, then you try to make 20 people unbelievably happy. And then you take the 20% that'll make them 80% happy, and you scale it, and you have the discipline to do that. That's the key. But then we skip all these steps. We're like, I want 10,000 today. How can I do that? Social proof, making myself feel important instead of focusing on the other person.
Right. Totally agree with that. So there's another thing that you surprised me about, was you have a new hobby, relatively new hobby. that I think stretches you out of your comfort zone even more than getting on a podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I love it when people just go, if I push myself a bit more out of my comfort zone and they do things I didn't think was capable, you grow, you learn more about yourself. But I think it helps you in other aspects that like, hey, this isn't going to kill me. I could do it.
Okay, so I'll sort of lay down the basic reasons why it came to this, and it has nothing to do with each other, but just personal growth. Now, roughly 2 years ago, I was on a family sort of get-together trip, and I was reaching down to tie my shoelaces, and I felt a pain in my stomach. And I didn't know what it was. I went to the doctor and to get it checked out, and basically the doctor said to me that you just gained too much weight. Mm-hmm. Like you're just out of shape. Your body's just starting to fall apart. And it was a wake-up call for me because my original degree was in human kinetics, health and fitness. I ran fitness clubs. I ran fitness conferences. I got out of it because I wanted more of a marketing or entrepreneurial approach, mm-hmm. but I should know better. And I ballooned to 252 pounds.
Wow.
And it was a wake-up call to me. And I'm like, I got to do something. So I started to go on a path of more aggressive personal development. And then, long story short, I lost 80 pounds. Mm-hmm. But during this process, I realized when I started to manage, deal with that, taking that face-to-face thing, saying, I got to eat better and I got to force myself to commit to this and giving up junk food and sugary drinks and stuff, I was able to do it. I started to think, well, I was able to do that. What else do I need to tackle? And I started to make an inventory of all the things I started to fear in my life. That maybe I was shivering my boots, but it was suppressed. And one of the things was I've always tried to tackle this sort of introvertness that I have. And my horrible story is when I was in high school. Did you know the story, the trumpet story?
No, why don't you share it for me?
Okay, so I went to this high school where you had to pick drama or band. And I hate the idea of doing stuff in front of people. I was like, I don't want to do anything with this drama thing. I'm gonna go to band, right? So I showed up at band and I picked the instrument trumpet. Now here's the problem. I didn't know how to read music. I didn't know how to play an instrument, and everyone in the class knew how to play instrument. I basically ran away from drama, but I got myself into a situation where this might not be ideal. I was so disrupted to the class. They shut me in the locker room where they keep all the extra band equipment to practice by myself. You okay there?
Yeah, I just had a little cough. Sorry.
So I'm in this room practicing, totally embarrassed, right? Everyone in the class knows because I suck and I'm the only one. I'm isolated in this room. I thought maybe I could pass the whole semester without, just kind of people forgetting about me. But at the end of the year, I had to perform in front of the school to pass this class. And guess what? I wasn't even good enough to pretend to play. And so the lesson for me was that if you run away from something like that, you're going to run into something that's worse. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying to systematically tackle this, but I really, I wanted to do this podcast thing, but I was still nervous about it. So, but I finally pushed myself into it. But to keep going along that, what you were alluding to, sorry, long-winded, which is comedy, is one of the things on my list that I said I'd never do. Because it's terrifying, right? You go out there and you can't just be a little bit funny. You're going to get crickets. You got to land jokes, right? So I had a great coach and she pushed me into it. It was a wonderful experience. And it really helped me come out of my shell. So I'm constantly looking for things like that to push myself just like you are.
That's an awesome story. Like I got way more out of like the backstory of push yourself than I was expecting. Like I thought we were going to talk a little bit about, hey, you just got up on stage and you did something that was challenging, but you really showed a good reason why avoiding things we're afraid of can lead to harder circumstances in the past. We should just do it. But I also like if you listen to Joe Rogan podcast, he's a comedian too. He talks about like how being a comedian is an interesting it's so much different than being like in a band or being like an actor, because you have this, you don't like, if you go see AC/DC, they're playing the hits. You're playing the hits. I want to hear the hits. I don't give a shit about the new stuff. But if you go see a comedian, you're like, you already told this joke, man. You got to come up with new stuff. So they're always out there. They create a set, and then they go and do a special, and then that's it. They got to start over. So they constantly going back, rewriting new material, and getting on stage and just sucking until they figure it out.
Oh man,
that, and then you're constantly learning. So I love that you're taking this thing that's like, it's not easy, and it takes a lot of time to perfect and become semi good at, and to go up there on stage and deal with hecklers. Or
well, I had a lot of help. I wouldn't say that I'm good, but I'll tell you about the process. So basically, you're supposed to record all the ideas you have. You're supposed to do 11 minutes of free writing every once in a while, and then you start to pick up the nuggets. But then I have a coach, and I try to tell some of these jokes, right? And then the first time I go do it, she's like, not funny, right? I'm like, oh, right? Because, it's cutthroat, right? There's no softening it, not funny. Right? So doing it a little bit more, and I'm like feeling a little bit prouder because it's a little bit more improved, hoping I'm getting a little bit pat in the back. I'm like, still not funny, right? So I went through this phase where it's like 6 times where it's like, okay, I finally, like the 3rd or 4th time, it's a little bit funny, right? Mm-hmm. And then the 6th time, it's like, okay, it's pretty good, but you still might not get a laugh, but I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's a good chance you're going to get a laugh. So it's kind of that dealing with that kind of like hit, over and over. You're like it kind of toughens you up a bit. Like, because a lot of times people think when they do something, they're expecting the pat on the back. So they go to the safe source, right? We're like expecting a thing, and you got to avoid that, right? You got to say, like, who's giving you the real goods on that, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's a cutthroat world, and when you want to get out there and expose yourself, there's critics, and there's also trolls and stuff like that. They're going to be cruel and mean, and you gotta sort out the good from the bad. You gotta take the good criticism, not beat yourself up too much when people are just mean in general, but learn from it. Also, not just take, hey, you did a good job, attaboy. And it's like, okay, well, we're not all getting participation trophies. Sometimes we have to go out there and take a stab, and it helps because we get better at it when we're challenged. So
yeah, well, what I really like about what you're doing with social is you're going out there talking about your challenges and your other things that you're trying to overcome, because that takes the power away from it, right? And just helps you work through it.
It's great. So, well, I think we've covered a lot of great topics, great advice, but I'd ask, what would be one last piece of advice you would share to people to essentially go all in on what they're chasing to do better?
Well, I mean, a lot of people say this, but I mean, I came to a point as well. I mean, there's only one life for us, right? Or there's 2 lives, right? The one life that we realize, but the day that we realize that we only have one life is the day that we sort of kind of embrace the fact that what's really the worst that can happen? You go up, you mess up, like the sun's going to still rise tomorrow. You're still going to have friends, and, people are going to hate you or look down upon you, right? So, that's kind of something that I've really realized and embraced. The more that I talk about my weaknesses and address them face on, grow by attacking fears. I've heard from someone I really like, the better life gets. And I've sort of tell myself that every single day, and I have it on the screensaver. And that for me, it just, when you go towards something that you fear, and you find a way to overcome it, even in a small way, everything in your life just gets better, and for people around you.
Yes, that's some great advice. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for, first, one, having me come on your show and all the information and help you got me getting started with my podcast. But 2, thanks for coming on and being a guest on my show. I think you've got tremendous value to offer people. So where can they find you if they want to connect with you or find out more about what you have going on?
Well, I mean, you can include it in the show notes or however you do it. But connect on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well, on Instagram. I'm open to connecting with people. If just like you, Nate, if you send me a, let's sell me something kind of email, then I'm just really not that interested. But if you're staying in touch and we're starting to engage each other and you find common interest, then sure, right? I'm open to that, and as time permits. But I make an effort for people that are genuine.
Awesome. You also have a business, Castaga Roofing. So if you're in the building industry, be sure to check it out. I've actually talked to your business partner, and I think you got a really amazing product. I'm not technical enough to probably speak on it, but it's some cool stuff if you're in the I would say more in the commercial roofing business or into re-roofing. There's some great stuff there. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Sometimes I forget sometimes, but yeah, definitely. One of the cool things is my business partner invented that technology 30 years ago. I think I talked to you. He invented the Windows Media Player too. He's a real techie guy. But I mean, I love being able to wake up and do things that I'm passionate about, helping people through our business. I genuinely love people that are passionate about stuff, that promote the best idea. I hate when products or innovations win because great marketing is applied to them. Mm-hmm. I hate it. I'll promote a competitor's product before I push a inferior product. So anyways, those are the things I'm really passionate about.
Okay, cool. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and we'll chat soon.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Make sure to visit our website, therealnatepeo.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, so you'll never miss an episode of All In. While you're at it, if you found value, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if simply tell 2 friends about the show. Looking to connect? You can find Nate Peo on LinkedIn or Instagram.